Mm. Hmm. All right. Here we go. And we get this going. All right, everybody. So today on the Chase for 8 podcast, we have DeepBarot. He's a Texas fan who's been making some waves in Sooner Nation this last week. How you doing today, Deep?
Lovely, lovely. How are you?
Perfect, man. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. So I think you wanted to start talking about the Texas LSU game first. So obviously, at the beginning of the game, it seemed like it was going to be a pretty solid defensive game, but the fireworks started shortly after the second half got started, I believe, and things just kind of took off from there. So I'll go ahead. You're a Texas fan. You probably watched it a little more intently than what I did. So I'll go ahead and I'll let you kind of take the floor and just walk us through the game. Kind of tell us what went on in your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, very much in the beginning portions of the game, defenses really stood out. I mean, it was a very tight game, I would say, particularly in the first quarter. But ultimately, I would say the reason, LSU ultimately won the game, and also the fact that they scored so many points on us was that they were slightly better than us, and I would not even say they were better in terms of the talent perspective on the field, but more so that they held their nerve in the times that really mattered. A couple of really, I guess, important points of the game very early on. When Texas got the fourth down catch that was dropped by Ingram. Momentum kind of, shifted from there. And then, the second time they also got, that interception by Joseph Osai, sorry. That also resulted in no points. A field goal. But it wasn't a very, how do I put it, satisfying performance, in terms of what a lot of Longhorn Nation was expecting this season, coming off of that Sugar Bowl win against Georgia. And it was a good enough performance from what I've seen in terms of the eye test and the potential implications down the line that Texas will be a good football team this year. But the question kind of remains: is this team good enough to actually win a conference title in the last season of the last season of this decade? And where does the Big 12 really stand in terms of its competitiveness as a conference at this current point in time? Obviously, as you're well aware, and I'm sure most of your fan base is well aware, Oklahoma has been carrying this conference in terms of conference titles and college football playoff appearances in this 5-year-old era. But a lot of Longhorn Nation had expectations on this game that they would actually beat LSU in hopefully a short not a short win but a small margin victory, and it didn't end up happening. The defense ended up kind of wearing down, I would say, towards the end. Both defenses wore down during the end, but the fact is that Texas towards the end of the game looked a little bit gassed out on defense, and Joe Burrow was running the ball down the field, and going 20-7 at half, you need to get a couple of stops, no matter how much your offense might score, to keep you in the game, and that just wasn't happening. Towards the end of the game, I would say the absolute nail in the coffin was when Joe Burrow got the first down and ultimately the touchdown after the 3rd and 17 play. I think there was like 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And, while we ended up scoring again immediately afterwards and almost recovered the onside kick, the reality was that, LSU was the more composed team on the day that held their nerve. So just closing remarks on the game, and then we can kind of discuss what the implications are for this and what my thoughts are, as a diehard Longhorn for this upcoming season. I just feel that Texas needs to really go back to the drawing board and figure out, how are we going to stop so many points being scored? Because the reality is that Joe Burrow is not going to be the best quarterback. No disrespect to LSU, no disrespect to Joe Burrow. He's not going to be the best quarterback that we face this year. And, it really brings up the point in which is Texas really back? Or what does it mean for Texas to be back? And, after this loss, a lot of questions kind of have popped up for us. There's obviously a lot of encouragement in the fact that we kept LSU, to a one touchdown victory. But, the real question is where do we go from here as not only a team, but also a conference? So my thoughts on the game. Also, one more point I want to make on Sam Ehlinger. I was impressed by Sam, the fact that he got over 400 yards passing, close to 461, I believe. More than Burrow, actually. But at the end of the day, I don't know if he's made that elite jump that I was expecting from year 2 to year 3. And for me, from what I've seen so far in the 2 games, it's a little bit early to really judge what's going to happen down the line. But I think he's a 4-year quarterback. And what this could mean is that this particular year could be a stepping stone year rather than a year in which, Texas was supposed to make that elite kind of jump in the national kind of picture. So that's kind of my thoughts on the game. That's kind of my thoughts on Sam Ehlinger, thoughts on ultimately what ended up happening, and I'm going to be excited when Big 12 play comes around. I think it's going to be a very close battle between Texas and Oklahoma this year, and go from there. Do you have any follow-up questions on that, or?
Well, no. I would like to go in and point out. Obviously, there was a certain amount of confidence that was being exuberated by Texas fans prior to the game being started. As someone who has lived in Texas and lived in Baton Rouge, I don't know how much attention that you pay to recruiting. I saw a lot of Texas fans who felt like that they were going to blow LSU out of the, basically run them out of the stadium. And LSU has recruited extremely well on the defensive side of the ball forever. It's pretty obvious. The big glaring, Achilles heel for LSU has always been the quarterback and offensive position. Now, LSU has gone to a more of a spread Big 12 type offense. And, obviously, as you could see with how Joe Burrow performed the other day, that's a little bit more quarterback friendly. It's better. It's better offense. You're using those skill players that they have acquired, basically off the back of their defense from the offensive side of the ball, and they have the talent to score those type of points whenever they're in that type of offense. Now, I've complained for years about top offensive players going to the SEC because the SEC is basically where you have those 5-star wide receivers that go to, not put up the numbers that they're fully capable of doing. You see that with guys like Theo Weiss and Trajan Bridges and Jaden Hazelwood, who've already made a huge impact at Oklahoma this year, and their ability to do that. So I've always been very skeptical about that, but LSU is utilizing those players finally how they need to, which is why that they beat Texas the other day. Is because they're using all their talent. That's really
and
just
I just wanted to add a quick point to what you're mentioning there, is that I wouldn't necessarily say that LSU has more blue chip talent than Texas, or that Texas was lacking in the talent.
Are we talking about offensively?
I
Because
agree
LSU has always recruited really, really well.
They've had a lot of great recruiting classes, particularly on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, I'm not diminishing Texas's talent. I'm not saying that LSU has better talent than Texas. I'm saying that they do have the talent on both sides of the ball. And if you keep up with recruiting, you know this, that LSU has always recruited extremely well. LSU is a recruiting hotbed, and they've always got really good players coming out of New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and it's right there. You can look 247 Rivals. You can look at ESPN's rankings. Both sides of the ball, they've got talent on both sides of the ball.
Very active in Texas, California, even other parts of the country like DC, Northeast. That's typically not LSU territory. They're able to get some of those 4 and 5-star guys over the last 2-3 years.
If you look at the bulk of their roster, it's going to be a lot of guys from Louisiana. I promise you that. And
that is true. That
right,
is true.
yeah. And a lot of their key players, a lot of these guys, the 4 and 5-star talent that they have on both sides of the ball, which they do have, is going to be from Louisiana. It's going to be mostly defensive players. And Derek Stingley is one guy who I've personally seen play in person in Baton Rouge. He's from literally probably about 10 miles away from where I lived in Louisiana, and he actually was in the same district as the high school that I went to down there whenever I lived down there in 2007, 2009. So I did get to see him play in person, which was another person I saw that you were pretty skeptical of. He's gotten a lot of praise from a lot of people, a lot of really, really highly influential people in college football. They get players like that yearly, though, on the defensive side of the ball.
Like, as a Texas fan, I was very, very surprised and also very impressed. Very impressed by the performance of Stingley in that game. Just looking at Colin Johnson, right? Someone who is a very experienced, 4-year veteran in the game. Projected as one of the early round wide receivers. Obviously one of our best, if not the best, wide receiver at Texas. And just looking at the way that he was able to box up, a 4-year veteran as a freshman, a true freshman in that game. I would have to say he's worth every penny of that 5-star.
Well, he earned the hype that he had coming into this game. That's all I really have to say about that, is that he definitely earned the hype that he had around his name going into that game. Now the thing about that is too, and we're kind of getting a little bit off topic here, but going back to the game, LSU had 2 straight possessions where Texas was inside the 5 and they held them on a goal line stand. And in both of those possessions that Texas had the ball, they did not get Colin Johnson the ball, who is a very big, bulky receiver who is obviously one of y'all's bigger playmakers. And they didn't try to get him the ball one time down inside the 5-yard line. They were matched up one-on-one with a true freshman inside the 5-yard line. They had the slant wide open actually on one of those plays, and they didn't even try to get it to him. So I think that's really missed opportunities in play calling could be attributed to possibly why Texas lost the game. If we're looking for a reason to really put blame on the loss anywhere, it would definitely, you have to look at your offensive coordinator. I think is a really big reason. The play calling was just atrocious inside the 5-yard line. Luckily, obviously, on one of those drives, you got the interception, got to get back down inside the 5, and then you turn around and you go 4 and out again inside your own 5. So, like I said, for me though, the big thing is that LSU had a newer offense. It's a little bit more quarterback friendly, and I feel like that's a big reason why that LSU got away with the win. Now, on top of that, it is kind of an eye-opening thing for the rest of the country though. Texas did have a 7-point loss, but it was a 7-point loss against a very, very talented defensive team. Who has pulled players from, like you said, Houston. You've got guys that have come from Tennessee, and Jacob Phillips, and mostly around Baton Rouge and New Orleans, who were recruited by multiple teams countrywide, including Oklahoma, including Texas, and I feel like that even though that it was a loss, it was still a little bit of a win. Even though I know y'all's head coach doesn't really believe in moral victories or anything like that, I still believe it was one for you guys because I've been very skeptical of Sam Ehlinger's arm prior to this game, and he definitely went out and he showed that he does he does have the skill players around him to be a very good quarterback throwing the ball. So that was a big question mark for him coming into this year, I believe, to a lot of people. So if he can do that up against that defense in LSU, I think that definitely bodes well for his future. And I do believe that he is a 4-year quarterback just because of how young the talent around him is. And obviously there's still those questions. One game, isn't really going to dismiss those questions that people have about him. It definitely silences people for a little bit, but it's still there. He's got to have that full season and full body of work and able to do that. So, I do believe that he will be back next year. I think it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen with Texas next year. So, if Tom Herman can keep people and from transferring and keep everybody at bay for one time, Texas could be a legitimate contender in the Big 12. Now, you got to look at what else is going around the conference with Oklahoma State, and you have Baylor is looking really, really good right now. You have Iowa State, obviously, is got a big game this week against Iowa to make a statement for themselves after a pretty rough start against Northern Iowa. So, the conference is definitely wide open right now. There is the Big 12 is on the upswing.
Are you, by the way, are you referencing the Big 12 this year, or are you referencing 2020?
I'm talking this year right now. The race is wide open, and the Big 12 is on the upswing.
I just wanted to bring in a quick point on that, is that I would definitely agree with you that the conference is a little bit more open this year than it was primarily throughout 2015 and onwards, when Oklahoma really began its domination of 4 straight Big 12 titles. But I still don't believe that those teams are at the level yet where they need to be. And I'm talking about teams that are not Texas and Oklahoma. I completely agree that, teams like Baylor, teams like TCU, teams like Iowa State, they're swinging up. But I just feel there's a big, talent gap and recruiting gap between, Texas and Oklahoma and the rest of the conference. And it's starting to become more apparent or transparent now because, Texas is a little bit more of a stable program with a good head coach. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of subject to debate between who's really, the best head coach in the Big 12, which I personally think it is Lincoln Riley right now. But Texas is a little bit more of a stable program than what it was throughout, the entire decade, really. And what that ultimately has resulted in is a huge recruiting advantage for both Texas and Oklahoma, which already had a good set of recruiting classes, more or less on par with Texas, slightly a little bit lower in some years, slightly higher than us in some years as well. But going forward, man, I completely agree with you that those teams are on the upswing, but I just don't think that they're on that level this year. I do think Iowa State's going to have a very good year next year if Brock Purdy really, excels this year for his leapfrog junior year. But this particular year, I think it'll come down to Texas and Oklahoma again. I think what this loss does for Texas, though, then we can kind of, go into other topics, but what this loss does for Texas, in my view, is that it means that Texas has no margin for error in terms of competing for potential college football playoff or even a Big 12 title, because I don't think that a team is good enough to win the Big 12 without, maximum 1 loss or 2 losses if it's an off year for both Texas, Oklahoma, really any contender. I think that more than likely a Big 12 champion is going to go 12-1, and if Texas is going to win the Big 12 this year, they're going to have to prove that they can beat really any team twice. Now, I think there's a possibility that Texas can win the Big 12 if there's 2 losses or more, but I think that the possibility of that is a little bit more remote or less transparent.
If I may,
but
really
I think
quickly,
it's going to be very interesting to see what happens
if I may, just really quickly, what do you think about the talent gap between Texas and Oklahoma State?
I think it's pretty huge, isn't it?
Okay. Would you remind me quickly and just kind of how that matchup has gone for the last 3 to 4 years?
Right, and
so
I completely,
I hate when people get into the talent gap type of stuff. If I may, Deep, I'm sorry, man. I just want to get this point in there really quick.
Hello?
Yeah, if I may, just really quickly, I want to get this point in here really quick. This is why that I really, really, when people bring up the talent gap, it almost makes me kind of cringe because of how Texas has performed this decade with the talent gap that they have. Because even though that Texas hasn't been great, they have recruited extremely well. USC, even though that they have recruited extremely well, has not played up to their talent level. There's certain statistics and certain things that people build, like they weight the way that you perform against the way that you recruit, and Texas is in the very top of the underperforming teams in the country yearly this decade when it comes to talent versus results. So I get the whole talent thing, but really what it ultimately comes down to is your development and obviously your coach's ability. And the reason I say that is because even though that Oklahoma has been down in recruiting this whole entire decade, we've still won, I believe it was 6 Big 12 titles, and this is the worst recruiting job that's been done in Oklahoma, even worse than the 90s. But the development has been there with our players that even though that we have had a couple years that were kind of a crapshoot, we've still been able to, win Big 12 titles, stay competitive in the national championship race, stay competitive in the Big 12 title race. We've won 10 games every year except for 1 year this whole entire decade. So I get where the talent gap is important, and I'm not going to dismiss that because it is, but that doesn't always mean that it's going to play out the way that the best team is going to win. That's why that you see teams like Georgia get left out of the college football playoff. That's the same argument that everybody was making to put Georgia into the playoff last year is that, well, they're a better team than what Oklahoma is, even though that they didn't earn it by not winning their conference championship against Alabama. So I think it's very dangerous to get into that type of a conversation where you're saying, well, the talent gap is large. Well, the talent gap doesn't always matter. That's why the Miami dynasty ended starting with the loss to North Carolina. That's why that the USC dynasty ended with the start of the loss to Stanford. That's why that you have, Oklahoma State has won, I believe, 3 out of 4 games against Texas. That's why you have an Iowa State team that's won 2 games in the last 4 years against Texas and has beat Oklahoma. So I don't think the talent gap really matters. I think really what matters is the development and the coaching that you're receiving and then how they utilize their scholarships.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. I just wanted to kind of bring up that, Texas in this past decade, I would say, and I'm just saying this as someone who's attended the university and really was close to the program and attended a lot of these games, still do attend the games once in a while whenever I get the opportunity to, is, Texas was lacking, as you mentioned, in the coaching and developing area for, I would say, a good chunk of this decade, particularly when the Mac Brown era was coming to a close.
I'll agree with that. And the results showed it.
Even in the Charlie Strong era, a lot of people really hyped up about Charlie. It was like my sophomore year of college, where a lot of people were very hyped up and excited about the prospect of bringing on Charlie Strong as the head coach, someone who had a great track record at Louisville, brought him on there to really rebuild the program and get Texas where it really should be, which is compete for a national title or a Big 12 title at the minimum every single year. But it just wasn't the case. And, a lot of people blame a lot of reasons for that. It could be the university boosters, Red McCombs being one of the boosters of the university, kind of saying that, Charlie would not be a good fit for this program. It wouldn't be a good. So there was a lot of, I would say, administration drama and.
Well, it seems like an opportune time to bring up the fact that Nick Saban was actually interested in the Texas head coaching position, and they hired Charlie Strong instead of Nick Saban. So it feels like a pretty good time to bring that up and just kind of drop that little notation in there. But you go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, the university administration, the people that were running the athletic department, there's a whole bunch of administrative issues that really, I would say, disappointed the program in the last 3, 4, 5 years or so. And I do agree with you you in the sense that Texas has decent recruiting, classes this particular decade, particularly really good classes the last 2 years. But it wasn't. I mean, there were years in this particular decade where the recruiting classes weren't that great. I mean, we had a number 25 class in 2017. We had another number 17 class in the transition year between Mac Brown and Charlie Strong. But yes, more or less, Texas has consistently had a top 10 class and closer to a top 5 class, in the good years, particularly in the last few years.
Which I might add that out of the whole entire 2013 class, I want to point out that only Obo Okoronkwo and I believe Stephen Parker actually saw considerable playing time for Oklahoma out of the 2013 class. So, anyway, you can go ahead there and continue with that.
Yeah, so, a combination of all of these administrative issues and just poor running of the athletics department in the past majority of the decade, I would say, has resulted in the decline of the Texas football program. And Charlie Strong was not a Texas guy. He did not really have many good recruiting relationships in the state of Texas. He's actually from Florida. So, a combination of everything really resulted in Texas just not performing to where it should be performing. And, for someone who's as young as I am, right, I'm 26 years old, I've kind of been moved from college about 3.5 to 4 years now. And I attended UT between 2011 and 2015 during what would be considered kind of the dark ages of Texas football, where we're missing bowl games, having 5 and 7 seasons. And I was literally 2 years removed from the national championship run of Colt McCoy and almost coming up with a second national championship in that decade between 2000 and 2009. So it was a huge disappointment and huge letdown, which a lot of Longhorn fans kind of, entering into this year have the expectation or the ambition, or I would say the dream, or whatever you want to kind of say it as a diehard fan, right, that we'll finally win the Big 12 this year and get into a college football playoff, or at least compete in the playoff. But it just didn't happen so far. I mean, in the years leading up to this year. And kind of before we transition into some of the other points we want to get to today, this particular loss to LSU kind of gives an indication that, in my eyes, right, as a diehard, Longhorn fanatic who absolutely loves, the university and loves the football team, I personally don't think that they're there yet, at least in terms of being a legitimate national championship contender this year. I think they'll have to prove first that they can, how do I say it, win the Big 12. And what I mean by winning the Big 12 is win it with a good enough kind of.
Are you there, bud? Are you there? Hello? I think we might have lost them. Hello? You there? Hello? Hello? You there? Hello? Deep, you there, man? Hello? You there? Are you there? Hold on 1 second. Yeah, I'm not hearing you very well. Hold on. Let me give you a call right back. Okay. You there? You're like very muffled. I've got you on speakerphone and it's very hard to hear you.
Me now?
Yeah, it's better. That's better.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so, kind of going back to the final remarks, and then we'll kind of get on to some of the other topics, is that the expectations for Texas kind of heading into this year was that hopefully this was the year for a lot of, Longhorn fans, that we could finally, win the Big 12 and get into the college football playoff. Not necessarily win the national championship, I think, but at least be in that picture. And I think that, based on what we saw from the LSU game and kind of heading into the rest of the season, I do believe that Texas is a little bit, far removed, not far removed, but a little bit removed from that conversation for now. I think the real, kind of question mark is that, is Texas really and truly back? And in my eyes, I think that they need to prove that they can win a Big 12 title first before they can really and truly say that. And from what I saw from the LSU game, I think that Texas may be a year removed from that.
Okay. All right. So
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you good. So kind of stepping off of the game really quickly and coming into I'm just going to kind of go towards England stuff that we've some kind of comments you've made the last couple of weeks. So first things first, I do want to clarify, do you believe that Oklahoma is a blue blood program?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, because it seems like there's some stuff that there was a comment you made that said, in a quote, USC sucks right now, but has 4 real national championships than OU, and the same number of claimed and unclaimed total, and is a true blue blood. So it sounds like you're calling USC a blue blood and Oklahoma maybe not a blue blood. And that they are poor right now, but likely will for another 5-ish years.
USC is a blue blood despite them sucking of late. That was what the reference was. Yeah, I think, there's probably thousands of tweets that have probably been circulated or circulating in regards to, I guess my passion or ambition for watching the game.
Right.
But yeah, I completely do agree that Oklahoma is definitely a true blue blood in the sport. I mean, they've been around since 1895. They have, the 6th best win percentage of all time. 7th best in national championships in terms of claimed national championships. Mm-hmm. I know there's a big debate between claimed and unclaimed, and different programs claiming a bunch of fake national championships. But I 100% have all. I mean, I don't want to misconstrue that tweet, but
yes.
I just wanted to show that USC is still a blue blood despite them sucking the past few years.
Absolutely.
But yes, I completely agree that Oklahoma is a blue blood and probably one of the more elite blue bloods in the sport.
Oh, okay. That's more than fair. I felt like there just need to be some clarification there, because I do feel like there was maybe some misconception of that. I know when I read it at first, I was kind of like,
Yeah, it was more in defense of USC. Despite them sucking of late, they're still one of the all-time powers.
So, I guess really, the next question is going to come down to, we're going to kind of go into another tweet here that we had, talking about how Oklahoma's schedule is ridiculous, or that we've inflated our schedule, and that we play the worst Pac-12 team in an FCS opponent, and that Texas never schedules FCS opponents ever, And you said that it's desperation at a new level while y'all play LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Michigan, and Ohio State in the incoming years. So, could you kind of expound on that a little bit more, kind of clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was a little bit of an emotional tweet, to be 100% honest with you. I do, and I even had another tweet following up on that. Is that Oklahoma has scheduled some very good teams in the past, including a home and home with Ohio State earlier this decade. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was a little bit of frustration, kind of coming off of the LSU game, kind of a little bit before that, where we as a program were kind of. I don't know if it was a good move on our part to really schedule all of these hard teams every single year, the next 10 years, back and forth with a home and home. But it does kind of set us up in a position where if we have an early loss, that may set us a little bit back for the college football playoff race. And this particular year, it's not Oklahoma's fault. I completely agree that, LSU just had a different schedule, and you guys are scheduling a home and home with LSU in the coming years. I just personally think that this particular year has kind of, fortunately or unfortunately, for either kind of sake of argument, really, it's resulted in a slightly easier path to the college football playoff for Oklahoma than Texas, because we had to play LSU.
Well, wouldn't you also agree though that also makes it a little bit more difficult and a slightly less margin for error now with the way that our schedule is panned out? Because, and I don't know if you saw my tweet to you about that as well when you made that comment, but originally LSU was slated to play against Oklahoma this year, but LSU backed out because they were demanding that we pay them more money, which Oklahoma, they normally pay the smaller guys that they have to play if someone backs out of a home and home. And we never do schedule FCS opponents unless someone does back out, and then we can't find anybody that wants to play us. So, this was just kind of one of those years where unfortunately that happened, and LSU then turned around and scheduled Texas. Obviously this was back a few years ago when things weren't going as well at Texas, and so now instead you guys got to play them instead of us. But like I said, and I understand that there may have been a little bit of frustration. We've got a very passionate fan base, and when you say something against Oklahoma, a lot of people tend to get really upset, really emotional. Instead of being able to have a calm discussion, they immediately go into almost a dog pile type, mob style type of beat down on people on Twitter. But Oklahoma's coming off of a stretch where we played Alabama, UCLA back when they were actually winning about 8 or 9 games a year consistently. We played against Florida State, we played against Miami, we played against Ohio State, we've played Tennessee, we played our fair share of teams, and we still have those matchups here in the future as well. And I'm even going to throw out Army out there because I feel like Army's a much better and improved team the last 3 years from what they have been, and a lot of people are going to dogpile on them obviously because of their recent history. But you look at Army's longtime history; it's a pretty rich one. But they've gotten really, really well, and they'll probably win another 10 games this year. But Army is another great team to play against. We've got a home and home with them. We're going to follow up on that. But, I think that when you look at it, and Texas has played against Ohio State back in at the beginning of Colt McCoy's tenure. You have obviously, you guys are playing against LSU this year, and I believe next year.
Yeah, hopefully we'll plant a big, huge burnt orange flag on the center of Tiger Stadium next year.
Well, and the thing about that is that in a lot of ways, a lot of people can attribute that the way that teams are scheduling now with getting this marquee matchup early in the year against a possible top 10 opponent or a formidable Power 5 opponent, a lot of people could attribute that to Oklahoma for doing that, because they have done that since Bob Stoops first got there in 1998. They've always done that. And then, of course, you look at the success that we've had and the teams that we've had to play in our postseason. A lot of times, when we're getting into those lower bowls and we're having those down seasons, we have wins against Oregon. We beat Iowa. We beat Stanford in those lower bowls. But then we get into these bigger bowls, and of course, your chances to win are going to diminish a little bit when you play against the top teams in the country every single year. Obviously your chance to win goes down. So it's not like that, because I do believe there was some other tweets about who has done more for the conference in this decade as well. Oklahoma's gotten into the college football playoff, and I think that what that does for the conference is, obviously it builds that power, because people are going to look at the Big 12 conference, and recruits even are going to look at the Big 12 conference in a lot better light than what they will the Pac-12. Not only because the Pac-12 is on the West Coast, but at the same time you have one team that's getting into the college football playoff from one conference, and you have a conference that's constantly missing out on the college football playoff every single year. You're going to want to go to the conference or a team that's going to give you the opportunity to play for a national championship. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to kind of add in a point to that, to this discussion is, it's been almost 14, 15 years now. 14 years. This would be the 14th year since the Big 12 has won a national championship.
Absolutely.
And, it's almost 10 years, actually, since the Big 12 has been in the national championship game.
Absolutely.
And, I think that, I don't want to say that our conference is weak, but I think that it's a little bit light. And what I mean by that is that there's only 10 teams. And out of those 10 teams, there's only 2 real perennial powers, all-time powers, blue bloods. If you don't consider Texas a blue blood, you can still say it's one of the all-time powers. But the point is that there's really 2 big state schools, Texas and Oklahoma, that are really and truly control a lot of the revenue, a lot of the media, broadcasting rights, a lot of the recruiting, a lot of the success that has really happened in the conference since,
and that's why Nebraska and Texas A&M both left the conference.
I think since the loss of, teams like Nebraska, teams like Colorado, even to a smaller degree Texas A&M, it's really resulted in, a little bit of a lighter conference in comparison to some of the others with just 10 teams and really no divisions. And I hate to say it, man, but when I was, an undergrad and even before that, the record was almost like a college football playoff quarterfinal, right? It was basically where, Texas and Oklahoma really and truly competing for who was going to go to the national championship or who was going to go to a really strong BCS bowl. And now it feels like it's just another regular season game, because you have the opportunity to take revenge in the Big 12 championship game.
Well, I can promise you that every Oklahoma fan that's out there right now, that it's not just another regular season game to them. That game will never be just a regular season game.
I agree with you on that point, but we do have the possibility of playing twice every year.
Yes.
And because we have the opportunity of playing twice every year, the question is how big is that particular one game in the grand context of the season?
Well, when you look at how the Big 12 championship game is played out, and it's a national championship run killer. With obviously, you look at how that Big 12 championship has kept Big 12 teams out of the national championship. Missouri in 2007. You look at Kansas State in 1998. It's done a lot of harm. So, it's not really necessarily something that I would say, diminishes the game in October or the Big 12 championship game. But it definitely is a quarterfinal game, I feel like. And again, that goes back to my point earlier that I was making, that Big 12 is on the upswing. And I feel that part of that is because of our conference leadership. They receive a lot of guff for the job that they do. But I feel like they do a very, very good job. And although the talent hasn't necessarily been there the last several years, if you look at who is coaching those teams and who's coaching now, and then obviously the way that those teams are recruiting and how the conference is recruiting as a whole now, it's different. It's gotten a lot better, and I feel like those results will follow. You have the ACC is basically being run by Clemson. You have the Alabama running the SEC, which is going to water down those conferences quite a bit. And then you have the Pac-12, and you have the Big 12, and I mean, I think those two teams are really going to profit off of the watering down of the ACC and I'll even say the Big Ten as well. The Big 20 as well.
Let's say heading into the 2020s, I genuinely believe that Texas and Oklahoma are going to be the two big horses in the Big 12 title race this year.
Absolutely.
There might be a chance of Iowa State making some noise, or some of the other teams, like you mentioned, Baylor's on the upswing, but I just don't think they're there this year. Going forward, heading into the 2020s and onwards, I mean, kind of where do you see the Big 12, and who do you really think this is going to be some of the standout programs to emerge, from?
Obviously, right now, you look at how Oklahoma State has played for the last 10 years and how Mike Gundy has performed and the moves that he's made. Oklahoma State's going to be a contender in the Big 12 this year. I didn't think they would be originally, but they've definitely showed me a lot of stuff in that Oregon State game that was really, really promising. Iowa State's going to be a big runner in it. Texas for me, and not trying to hurt your feelings, and this is definitely not a homer thing. This is just how the Big 12 has played out the last several years, and I don't think that they're quite there yet. I really have Texas somewhere between 4th and 5th this year in the Big 12, and I have Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, and TCU and Iowa State all ahead of them right now. So that may be a little bit of a.
I just want to bring up just a point to that, and I you're obviously subject to your opinion and keep the opinion that you have, but I honestly feel that if Texas does not kind of make the Big 12 championship game this year, I'm just saying this like with pure, how do I say it, like from the bottom of my heart as a fan and also someone who's really and truly close to the program, I feel that if we don't make the Big 12 championship game this year, and as you say, finish 4th and 5th or lower, I would feel that Texas is really and truly not back, one. But two, how does that shape 2020, where a lot of people do expect or hope or have ambition that Texas could make a college football playoff run or a national championship run? And if that really and truly does not happen, right, I mean, then it feels like we're still living in an era where, Vince Young would still be considered the all-time great Texas quarterback, and then, Colt McCoy would be somewhere close behind there, but you wouldn't have Sam Ellinger's name in that picture. And really and truly, figure out kind of what would it really take for Texas to be in that picture, because, as you mentioned, and as I mentioned, Texas does have the number one revenue. It has, a lot of the great facilities and money and resources to be an elite powerhouse.
Well, they should be. There's no excuse for them not to be.
I think it's an interesting take you have that we'll go 4th or 5th in the conference this year. I think that's like the first time I've heard it.
Well, I 100%, like you said, I'm entitled to my own opinion. I have a little bit of differing opinion from a lot of people. I'm not one that usually just kind of throws a random thing out there. If I call something, it's usually because I have a genuine belief that's how it's going to play out.
Who do you think is going to be in the Big 12 championship game this year?
I think that it's going to be Oklahoma and Iowa State, and that's just, again, my personal opinion, but a lot of people get lost in watching things week to week, and I don't know, have you ever played, I mean, what level of football have you played up to?
High school.
Okay, so same here, so people that haven't played the game before, they don't really understand what all kind of goes through. They don't see that these guys are still human beings, and you're going to have bad days, you're going to have bad weeks. There's going to be games where you play and you don't do very good, and there's going to be games where you play out of your mind, and that's just stuff that happens. There's always the unseen and unpredictable things that happen. there's always the unseen and unpredictable things that happen in football that you just can't predict, like Iowa State beating Oklahoma State and keeping them out of the national championship in 2011. So there's stuff that's going to happen, and I count on the unaccountable things happening, and that's why that I say that there's trends with how matchups go. Obviously, Kansas had been playing TCU extremely well. They got a win against TCU. I mean, it's stuff like that's real factors.
I'm not saying that upsets can't happen. I think upsets are going to happen. I think that Texas will probably drop one game before the Big 12 championship game if they let their guard down.
The games that I have my eye on are.
I would be really shocked.
The games that I have an eye on for Texas losing is going to be the Oklahoma State, and the Iowa State games. And those are the three games that I have Texas losing and then finishing at 8-4. So, and again, that's just Iowa State's played Texas extremely well lately. They've done really great in building their depth under Matt Campbell. They have a lot of really good playmakers. They've got possibly the best quarterback in the Big 12, or the guy who I feel like is the best quarterback in the Big 12, and Brock Purdy. You have Oklahoma State, who they redshirted Spencer Sanders last year. Mike Gundy stuck to his guns, and now they have a very mature redshirt freshman quarterback with a lot of talent who has led the offense extremely well. You have a running back in Chuba Hubbard who's going to have a breakout season this year, and you have a wide receiver in Tylan Wallace who's going to be a Biletnikoff finalist if he can stay healthy. And then a pretty solid defense. I mean, it's not great, but they can hold teams back long enough for their offense to jump out on them, and I think that's where that can help Oklahoma State out with that. And then, of course,
now, you also do realize the possibility of Oklahoma State upsetting Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something that I'm ever going to dismiss, because it's a rivalry game. It's a huge game in Oklahoma every year, and for Oklahoma State, and just because of where that program's been historically, that's kind of their Super Bowl game, and that's why that you have games like the 2001 game where Oklahoma State upset Oklahoma. You have games like I believe it was 2003, we lost 38-28. You're going to have those games that happens, and or actually it was 2002 that happened. It was 2001, 2002, but you're going to have those games that happen like that occasionally, and for Oklahoma, it's not a guarantee that we'll even get to the conference championship game. It's extremely difficult to win back-to-back conference championships, much less back-to-back-to-back, much less 4 in a row, and then further than that, 5 in a row. So the odds are definitely stacked against us. We do have the talent to do it, but oftentimes talent fails to show up and hard work wins. So I'm not going to go all in on Oklahoma being the conference championship. They're my favorite team to possibly win the conference championship and get to the college football playoff. But when you are on rented quarterbacks, which are these one-year transfer quarterbacks, your margin for error is very, very minimal. Jalen Hurts is the quarterback that has spent the least amount of time with Lincoln Riley before being thrown into action between Kyler and Baker. So I don't necessarily believe that, just because we have a guy like Jalen Hurts who has been great so far, I don't think that is a given that it's going to continue throughout the year, because there's things that happen week by week. You're going to lose players, week by week to injuries and those sorts of things. So it's not a lock that Oklahoma's going to get to the conference championship. It's my pick, but it's not a lock. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Oklahoma has this thing locked down easy. The Big 12 travels through Norman, but it's never a guarantee.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment, I would say. I personally think that is the most fair assessment. I think that, to be honest with you, OU is the heavy favorite this year, and I'm not just saying that as a fan. I think that if there is a program that could challenge Oklahoma and Texas, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Texas fan, but I do believe that the development and the progress that Tom Herman has been making with his players and his development in the system, and the natural evolution and development of Sam Ehlinger as a player, from where he was as a freshman to his sophomore development to now a junior, with that wide receiver core and that offensive line, which I'm very impressed by the Texas offensive line, by the way. I think that they have one of the best offensive lines in the Big 12 this particular season.
Right.
With a lot of that experience coming off of Samuel Cosme. I don't know if you had a chance to kind of see his film. Looking at some of those other guys like Zach Shackelford, who's a 4-year veteran in the system, their center, and one more captains as well. And Parker Braun, who was a grad transfer from Georgia Tech, who's now, a senior in the system. I think there's a very high level of talent in Texas that has developed in comparison to the previous years under the system. So, again, I could be wrong. I think that there's a very likely possibility, as you mentioned, of a potential upset happening somewhere in the Big 12 schedule for Texas. But I would not be surprised or shocked if it's going to be Texas and Oklahoma again this year.
And neither would I. Again, that's when you look at the way that both those teams have recruited, that's who you should expect to be in the conference championship. But again, like I said earlier, when you look at the talent-wise situation of teams, it's not always accurate. It's a very fluid thing to base an opinion on, and that's where you have to look at those things like development, where Iowa State has had extremely good development. They've got a very deep running back room right now. They've got a great quarterback who's getting better and better as he goes along. You have Oklahoma State, who, again, they sat Spencer Sanders last year with the intention of him learning the offense, him getting better, him getting adjusted to the speed of the game.
Speaking of Oklahoma State, I think the problem with them is their defense.
I agree.
I don't think their defense is that good.
100% agree with that. Like I said, though, what is going to help them, and again, this is just based off of past things that we've seen from Oklahoma State, is they have the knack to hold teams off long enough that they let their offense jump on them, and that has made a lot of a difference. Now, when they haven't been able to do that, that's where they've been upset by teams like TCU and beat down by teams like Baylor, is because their offense gets slow starting, or they just make a couple mistakes late in the game like they did last year in Bedlam, or make some bad coaching calls like last year in Bedlam that, that's led to them losing games. But they have consistently won 10 games every year, or every other year basically, since 2000. I want to say it was 2009 or 2010 is when they started the streak. But this is the best run that Oklahoma State has had in their program's history. So to dismiss them based off of how they've been recruiting and the talent that they have is, I think, is folly, because they definitely have the results to back it up.
Somewhere, I think Iowa State is probably the third best team in the conference in my eyes. Right? I could be wrong, but that's how I see the conference this year. It's going to be Texas, Oklahoma, Texas. One of those two is going to win the Big 12, and then you're going to see the likes of Oklahoma State or Iowa State kind of competing for that third and fourth position. I think West Virginia and some of those other teams are a little bit down this year. Just because they're going through a new coaching cycle. We've kind of brought on new coaches. They're kind of still trying to figure out how to run the system, particularly Texas Tech, Kansas State, Kansas, and West Virginia.
Okay. All right. Well, Deep, I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me today, man. I felt like we had pretty solid conversation. Would you feel like that's pretty fair to say? A little bit more relaxed in nature compared to some of the conversations you probably had on Twitter the last couple of weeks?
Absolutely. Just want to make a quick closing remark.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Did we end up covering all of the points you wanted to discuss? Or
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you kind of felt left out?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable with everything that we talked about. Like I said,
Okay.
It's
Absolutely, and this is going to be on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm not going to be too 100% on how the audio quality is going to turn out to be, but it is going to be on YouTube. So it's also going to be on SoundCloud as well.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty then, thank you very much. I really enjoyed being on your show, and hopefully this will be a good season.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So hope that we get to play you guys 2 times again this year, because the only thing that can make me smile more than a successful podcast is beating the shit out of Texas twice. So,
Okay.
all right, man. You have a good one, okay?
Well, we hope we beat you twice as well.
All right, man. You take care.